So I think from what we have seen today, it's undoubted that the ERC, the European Research Council, has had a tremendous transformative effect on the science landscape in Europe. It made it very prestigious to get European funding, actually, and it has really allowed for transformative, pioneering frontier research. And so I would like to start by asking Professor Labastida, was this predicted, right? I mean, how was it 10 years ago when the ERC was launched? Was it something which was seen as a no-brainer, or was this a controversial program?
Well, unfortunately, Sir Clothin left because he's one of the founders, members of the Scientific Council, and probably he's better positioned than me to answer this question, because I joined ERC in 2011, okay, not from the very beginning. But talking to the members of the Scientific Council and also to former members, they were surprised, okay, that the achievements, okay, are so high as we are monitoring them nowadays. Okay, it is true that I think there has been a huge effort, but I think we have to look at this as a very cooperative effort from many sides. The scientific community, of course, that they work very hard to make good proposals and then to implement the research programs, and also the panel members, okay, because this is a very hard work, okay, to be a panel members. Also, we have every year like around 8,000 remote reviewers that they are not paid, but they do the job, okay. And they do a very good job in general. So it's really a collective effort, okay, that we are doing, and I think we have achieved these results, positioning Europe now in a situation much better than 10 years ago. Okay,
and so maybe I start by asking Professor Pereira, I mean, what was the impact of getting the ERC grant for your research, right?
Well, I think here, the previous speaker before me mentioned what is basically the impact. So,
but from a personal level,
yeah. From my perspective, my personal perspective, of course, for young researchers to be able to have such a grant and to promote, let's say, your ideas, not worry about, let's say, or not have big concerns about how to get funding in the next first 2 years. So just trying and focusing, implementing your project, it's of course a great tool. The amount is also very, let's say, very interesting. And I can tell that I have been also talking with young researchers in the US recently, and they are basically jealous of Europe in terms of this program. So it's a big impact also because also ERC has a kind of quality stamp as well. So the way the program was conceived, the way the evaluation is done, so aims exactly to give grants to what they believe are the best researchers in Europe. So also this quality stamp is also very important, and also help you to leverage your in the beginning of your career, and also to, let's say, to start to be known as well as a ERC grantee. And this opens also some doors, of course. And when you are starting your career, this is basically essentially, of course. And then thinking also on a big piece of equipment that you may need that not always are available, or you cannot afford using your own funding from national projects. So it's also a big step. So I think it's a big boost for anyone, especially in Portugal, for sure.
So, Professor Freire, can I ask you, I mean, there's many things which were highlighted also from our questionnaire, right, to scientists. What people say, I mean, where young scientists think is the biggest impact of ERC, right? Length of funding, the amount of funding, the excellence stamp. So if you would think about what is the one factor which makes the biggest impact for you of having an ERC, what would you single out? Is it the time you have of breathing now? Is it the amount of money? Is it the network which comes with it?
No, I think that is Only one, right? I think that is the opportunity of exploring our high-risk ideas, because otherwise no one will give you money to try those high-risk approaches. And in addition to be able to establish an independent career, of course, but I think it's a great opportunity in this type of high-risk, high-gain.
So the opportunity to be actually a scientist, right? I think that's what kind of ERC provides. So, Professor Barquinha, can you maybe highlight what was the, if you think about the mix of funding available at the national level and now the ERC, right? For you, what was the impact of national funding or absence of national funding on getting the ERC? How does that mix? Was national funding important for you to prepare for getting an ERC? Or was the ERC the only possibility to actually do your research proposal? Or was it just a synergistic effect on your research proposal?
Well, in my own case, I had it was a very good opportunity because before applying to this ERC grant, I was already involved as researcher in different collaborative projects within Age 2020 or FP7. So that made me start building a good collaboration with different fields of speciality that I would need for my work to come true. But of course, to start working in such a very broad area like this nanoelectronics, in my case, it's very challenging to start that with the national funding. It's not only about the budget, which is completely different from a national fund. It's the way that the grant works. So like Mara was saying, you can really put high risk ideas into play. You have the freedom to do that. And it's not very easy, for instance, in collaborative projects to do that. You really have to stick to that deliverable that needs to be done within this month and so on. And you really, most of the times, you really don't have time to be creative, at least the way that you want. So collaborative projects are definitely really, really important, but they have to be interpreted in a completely different way than these research grants.
So Professor Vogels, you spent many hours, including yesterday night, crunching the numbers from the survey, right? So, and I think a message which could be seen in the presentation is that there is a lot to be criticized from the ERC. But can you maybe highlight a bit more about what comes out of the survey in terms of other funding instruments coming from the European Union and how they relate to the ERC?
I probably disagree that there is a lot to be criticized. I think
so a perception which could be seen from.
I would say the biggest message actually from the survey in regards to the ERC was that everyone loves the grant and wants to have it, and it's an amazing opportunity. And I think that's also what's coming through here, right? It's the first time that you can take your own steps, that you have academic freedom, that you can sit down and write a collaborative grant. In fact, it's not possible to think about writing a grant without having funding before. So it's a real watershed. And I think that's what often the criticism of other funding schemes was that there wasn't enough money to do something like that, and that that package was what made it special.
But was there any what was the feedback in terms of the other funding schemes, right? Because at the end, as we heard today, ERC is 17% out of all the funding going to researchers in Europe, right? So did people want to keep because FET also wasn't very popular, or at least not even known. So what about the network grants, etc.? Were people seeing that as an option at all?
We didn't really ask about these grants. We should have probably, but we focused on the starting grants. We focused on young people and looked what was out there. one message that came through was that people didn't know what FET was and associated FET with Human Brain Project, and that there was a lot of animosity towards the Human Brain Project simply because of the ongoing fights within neuroscience on the value of that project. But other than that, I think.
So to the three ERC grantees we have here, so do you see your own opinion represented in the survey results which you saw today? Would you say that actually fits with your views in terms of how useful ERC is and how impactful it is, or would you say that your personal experience deviates from the overall statistics you have seen today? Would someone like to comment?
Well, I can start by saying, yeah, I think yes, it's basically, let's say, mirrors what I think about ERC panel. Of course, there is one interesting result that was, the opinion about the referees, of course, depends on the evaluation, but there was an interesting result that even the rejected ones in the interview had, let's say, a good opinion about the reviewers, even higher than the average. So, as I told you, so the way the grant or the program is conceived, I think it's a very well established one, because evaluation process as it is, including the interview, the number of referees also involved. I think, of course, the time that this was a polemical, let's say, or about the time involved or dedicated by a referee to a proposal. But it comes from the perception of the grantee, of course, because if you get a bad review, you always say, okay, the guy didn't pay attention to this. But indeed, we are also discussing this during coffee break. If you look to the evaluation report, after immediately receiving, you will basically be mad about it. But if you read it after 1 week, you'll see that most of the bad, let's say, or the guys that rejected your proposal, for instance, or say bad things about your proposal, are indeed right. So, and most of the criticisms are right. So, I think this basically reflects, the results basically reflects what I think.
That's what we found in the survey too, that the reviewer reports for people that made the interview stage or even that made it into the second step were always excellent, almost without fail. And it was really the first step where there was the most criticism with regard to reviewer quality.
So Professor Lebastida, I mean, looking at your data, the data from these metrics company, looking at the survey, it almost looks that all that Europe needs is ERCs. So do you think, so where do you think that, or where does the ERC see the limit to their mission, right? What can ERC not achieve in Europe? Why should not 100% of European funding go to the ERC? Because you promote excellence, you promote collaborations better apparently than most network grants do, right? You managed to achieve that Europe took over the US in top 1% citation, I mean impact papers. So what do you think can ERC not achieve? Let's think about it that way.
Well, one of the main issues is all these very good projects that we are not able to fund, the famous unfunded days, okay? This is really something that we are pushing to of course you can solve this with more funding, okay? And we hope that in FP9 we will get enough funding to be able to fund this part. And the numbers are there. They have been given in this position paper of the Scientific Council. This is one of the aims to try to increase the budget to reach this. And well, because it's very unsatisfactory for us to see that all these great proposals and great scientists, we are not able to fund them, right? Regarding the evaluation, as I said, okay, ERC from the very beginning was organized in such a way that I mean, always open to receive any feedback to try to improve things, okay, in the way they are done, and we do this systematically every year. And now, of course, everything can be improved, but I think we have reached an evaluation system that is quite good. Step 1 is actually probably the weakest. I think we have a very good step 2, especially for young researchers with the interviews. We are unique in the world doing this, and I think this is really a part of the success. It's true that in step 1 it's more difficult. Okay, there are many proposals. It's done only at the level of the panel. But ERC is conceived to try to identify high-risk, high-gain proposals that they are going to really make a difference, as was said. And in this step 1, the aim of the panel is to try to identify these potential cases to pass them to step 2. Okay, so it's all, because sometimes we get the criticism, there are no specialized people in step 1. Okay, so they are more generalists, that they look at the overall proposal and so on. But it's intrinsic to what we want. And we want proposals that they are not just solving a very tiny problem that is here. No, we are looking for something else. And this is the one is designed in this way. It is true that sometimes some panel members, they write very, let's say, telegraphic reviews, okay? And we try this to not happen, okay, with our scientific offices, that they provide support to the panel members. But but sometimes this is the case. We try to minimize this because we think also it's important to provide good feedback to the applicants so they can improve what they are proposing for the next calls, right? And in fact, we have, an internal system where all the panel members are assessed, okay? If they do the right job or not, and typically we renew like 25% of them every year. Okay? It's good to have a rotation, so you have fresh people, okay, in the panels, and we do that, and through an internal assessment together with the scientific council, and of course the people that they write very telegraphic reviews, they are excluded. So we have, let's say, we impose quality not only that they are top-level scientists, but also in the work they do. Okay, and sometimes, well, some panel members at the one just say, "This is too much work. I don't want to work anymore with." So we have to have a good balance, not to press too much, but to have good people. But let me add, because there was the comment made on the researchers from the United States, right? That sometimes the panel members that we have from the United States, they really are very impressed, especially in the evaluation starting grant consolidators, and they are trying to export the system to their funding agencies, especially NIH. NIH is now having a problem because the young researchers, typically they get the first grant after 40 years, after they are 40, right? So this is really very bad for the country, okay? Because and then they are trying to design a funding scheme to be able to target young researchers, and all the proposals they are trying to simulate what we do in starting and consolidator. So it's very much appreciated when we have these people from the United States.
We have the same experience within our institution, where actually we recruit a very large fraction of American faculty, and one of the big assets is to have them come early, because here they can apply and are normally successful for an ERC grant. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also an exceptionally useful tool for actually reversing the brain drain, and not only reversing, but actually getting US top-trained scientists to come to Europe. Are there questions from the audience? Yes?
I just would like to say that even the ERC stamp or logo is something that is very important for youngers to get their own careers, not only to make research, but also to get their own positions. In my faculty, if you get a ERC grant, you can get a contract, you can be hired by, and this is the case of the two guys that are close to you. Otherwise, they should not get it, because you are in a crisis in Portugal, and this is not possible. So it opens doors for the youngers and to promote a career. And this is something which is very important. The other message that I want to tell you, when you started and you spoke about we need to change, of course, we have to change every day. I remember that who started the ERC was something called Initiative for Science in Europe. And this Initiative for Science in Europe, the first idea was to promote life science only. And in 2002, Julius invited Gago to go there, and he said, if we want to be a win-win position, we must involve all in this community. And the first time that he went to speak with the commissioner is important to know the history. When we went to the commissioner with him, and the commissioner said, no way, we will not create ERC. And Gago said, no, we will do it. And in 2004, he wrote this manifesto that was published in Science. I have the pleasure to sign it. And at that time, the idea was to publish in Nature. They asked 20,000 pounds. And then it was a friend of Gago that got free of charge to publish in Science. Okay? And this was the first message addressing to the people saying that we need something different. The idea is to make something different for all the scientific community, not just for a ghetto, but for all. And I think this was the beginning, the success. The success story of ERC is that the idea was not to promote a niche or just a group or a cluster, but to promote science as a whole. I think this is the secret. And for the beneficiaries of the ERCs in Portugal, it's not only in Portugal, I know other countries that in Belgium, I know places where if you get a ERC, you get a position. And this is something very important to give stability. It's not just to make research, it's to give stability to the researchers for the future. Because you cannot hire and have a grant every 5 years. You need to get stability to promote your ideas, and this is the job.
And because, yes.
I have a sort of mixed feelings about what was just said about offering stability to the ERC grantees. I have absolutely nothing against ERC. I'm connected to ERC in many different ways. But recently, I'm also connected as the director of a research center. And I have fears sometimes that many institutions are actually using the ERC as their selection panels. And I'm not sure they should be like that. This is something that I have been thinking for a very long time. And in fact, I discuss at several agency levels about this, whether being selected for a research proposal should be a guarantee that somebody is the most suitable person for a position. And of course, if I were a candidate, I would think so. But being the director, I think that we need additional evaluation before we make these decisions. So I know that this is a controversial statement, but I would like to raise some more discussion about this.
I think your point is especially important, thinking about how many people do not get funded who are still seen as being excellent, right? So what does our panel here, what's the feedback, right? I mean, to the ERC becoming almost like a victim of its own success, and kind of this other criticism also that, for example, it demotivates national funding agencies from investing into these things.
Well, what I can say is that, of course, for the one that gets the grant, it's very good. For those that don't get, can be frustrating, of course. The system is not perfect. From my point of view, I don't think this should be, let's say, like mandatory. So if you are in an institution and you get ERC, you can get a position or not. It depends if you apply or not. That's the point. It also, I know that from some institutions, it also depends on the institution. So if you want to open a position or not, so it's not mandatory. It depends on the strategy. So as the head of the university or the research center or whatever, you can define which is your strategy, and based on that, make the selection. I think this is open. This is not mandatory for sure. So it depends on.
I mean, I can also tell you from our institution's perspective, right? And also when I get asked by younger people, my advice is always go for an institution which puts money on you and on your position, right? Because you never know when you're going to get funding. And also, and that's a question I would like to follow next, is what happens after the consolidator stage, right? So eventually, you need to have someone who backs up your risk idea, not in terms of institutionally. So just going for someone who will just take if you bring your own money is a problem on the long term, or can become a problem. I'm really sorry, but we will have to cut this short because of the award ceremony. And I would like to ask a last question now here, which is, again, thinking about now perspective of stability, right? Again, there's starting grant, there's consolidator grant, and then comes this big unknown called the advanced grant, right? So thinking about now also working in a country like Portugal where, again, national funding is not, let's say, generously available or predictable also, how do you feel about this step after the consolidator level? Maybe the two of you who haven't yet said.
Consolidator or to the advanced?
Beyond the consolidator, right? What comes after the consolidator?
Well, we are still on the way to the consolidator. So we have more years to get to that phase, I hope.
Yeah.
It will be difficult because it's a large step, but I think if you do it well, I think you have more 5 years of consolidator, and then you are in conditions to apply to an advanced. Of course, it has to be an outstanding CV, almost a full professor or whatever. But I think you are in conditions if you do it well. So I think there is not a...
Sorry, is it, so I spoke to a few early career PIs like us, and they said that a consolidator grant is almost like a ticket out of here. Because it proves that you have 5 years of funding, and because you know that slowly the funding stream from the ERC will dry up, it's almost like it gets harder to get an advanced grant, that people use the opportunity to advertise themselves as a consolidator grant holder to leave Portugal or to leave the smaller, less economically stable countries to go to the core countries. Is that something that's true? Is that something that you perceive like that, or?
Still critical mass to make this kind of analysis in Portugal. Okay.
I know some consolidator ERC grantees, and they are in Portugal. They don't tend to leave.
Take it out.
No.
I know people.
This wasn't about Portugal, right? This
Perspective.
But anyway, let's give the last word now to Professor Labastide.
Let me comment on this because many people in the research community, they think that there is a gap between consolidator and advanced, that there is a non-land valley there. But our statistics, they don't show that, really, okay? There is well, I didn't show this slide, but they show a continuum when you plot age versus grants. Of course, there are many more in the range between 30 and 40 years. But it's continuous, okay? And so, I mean, there are people, very young researchers that apply to advanced grant and they get the grant. Actually, it's a decreasing function with age, okay? The number of grants in advanced grants. So there are many that are, I mean, people between 40 and 50 years. So always that I hear this, I tell them, well, this is the evidence that we have is not that. Even there are people with 35 that are 35 and they get an advance because they apply very early. This is not what we really see in the statistics. So go ahead and apply. I mean, don't feel that you don't have opportunities if you are a young researcher and you are applying to advanced grant, okay? Because well, we don't see the case. Anyhow, the council is considering a potential extension of the window for consolidators. This is, I mean, this is as the other thing is discussed every year, okay? And but I probably for FP9 this may be something that this decision may be taken because we are at least. The thing is that this is not evenly distributed in the three domains. I mean, this gap effect, if any, is more visible in life sciences than in the others. Okay.
Let me just say one quick word about that. That is, from my perspective, you should not rely only in ERC as your money. Okay, so it's a good way to start, a very important way to start. As long as you can get the consolidated grant, perfect. But during this period, you should always try to promote other ways to get funds, of course. So, because at the end of the consolidator, as was said. So you may face a dead hand, or at least a period with, where you cannot apply, or you don't have a strong CV to apply for an advanced grant, and you may face some, let's say, dead valley during that time. So if you take this opportunity to promote, to leverage other ways to get money, I think you can survive to this dead valley. Without that, it will be much more harder, for sure.
Okay, so I think for the purpose of time I got asked, I'm sorry to really not extend it too long. I would like to thank our panelists and also actually thank the ERC, because I think the ERC is a wonderful example of what happens when you have scientists be in charge of science funding, right, and have actually bottom-up decisions on how science is funded. And I think in the same sense of what we heard this morning about how Bell Labs worked, where a scientist went to a scientist, had its idea vetted and went on in an efficient way, this is the way I think science should be done and funded. And I think ERC's success speaks to that, and we are all looking forward to more funding instruments which are designed according to the ERC. Thank you very much.